Good afternoon, everybody. I think I'm going to go ahead and start. We've had several people sign in, so we'll go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everybody and thank everybody for attending. Before we begin, I'd like to take care of just a couple of housekeeping matters. This is the retail energy fraud in Texas. Um, and we'll start with reminding everyone of the Retail Energy Market Fraud Coalition's antitrust statement and the guidelines that you were required to review when you signed up to attend this webinar. The coalition strictly prohibits any participants from using their participation in the coalition activities as a forum for engaging in practices or communications that violate the antitrust law. We've approved guidelines for participants to review, so make sure that you review those. And just a reminder that the antitrust laws are intended to promote competition in markets, and our efforts are intended to promote best practices within the industry. I also wanted to remind everybody that this is our second webinar on the topic. And if you haven't seen the first one, or you know of somebody who wanted to participate in this one, let them know that we do post the past webinars on the website for them to review. We also are going to leave time at the end of the speaker presentations to host questions and answers. Also, during the webinar, you can submit your questions that we'll try to answer during the speaker's presentation, or if time permitting, we will address at the end of the presentations. Also, at the end of the webinar, we will present you with ways you can become more actively involved in the coalition. We will also provide you with the opportunity to share your feedback and suggest new topics and next steps. With these few housekeeping matters out of the way, let's begin. As you can see here, we're looking at our agenda, and it will begin with an introduction of our speakers. In today's webinar, which is Texas focused, our agenda will address the following topics. What is fraud? We got the fun topic of pots, pans, and regulatory lag. Next, implementing safeguards, combating fraud with internal controls, how you can participate in our fraud coalition, and we will end with some opportunities for question and answers, as well as feedback and next steps. Now we'll turn to the speakers. I am going to, my name is Madeline Kuchera. I'm the president and CEO at EarthEtch. We are a regulatory and operational consulting firm. We also, as a speaker, is Kelly Bach. Kelly is principal consultant with Regulatory Compliance Services in Texas. We are also fortunate to have two of our speakers that are from the retail energy providers within Texas that are going to share their experiences with fraud in the Texas market. This includes Brandon Young, who is CEO of Young Energy in Texas, doing business as Payless Power. We also, on the next slide, have Sam Luna, who is Director of Product Marketing at BKV. Both speakers are going to share some experiences they've had in the market in Texas as it relates to fraud. And last but not least, we have Miguel, Huerto, who is counsel at his own law firm with the same name. Miguel has been actively participating in regulatory law matters in the utility and retail energy space in Texas for quite some time. As you can see on these last two slides, we've got a lot of detail about everybody's background, as well as email addresses if you wanted to follow up with any of the speakers after the webinar. So with that, we'll turn now to our actual speakers. First, we're going to have Sam Luna. Sam is going to discuss what is fraud and how to identify it. Sam, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks. I appreciate the time to talk with everybody. This is something that I'm very excited about, and it's going to require a collaborative effort from all of us. Fraud. I came from the e-commerce brick and mortar background in the 90s when companies were moving online, digital, and fraud existed then. It exists now, and we're going to have to continue to fight it. Fraud really is somebody that's taking advantage of a system for their own financial gain. And what we're seeing very interestingly in the rep space over the last 10 to 15 years has been somewhat of a transition also of why we're seeing fraud. We all started off our reps with our enrollment process, really trying to create frictionless, customer-centric enrollment paths. And what that has turned out to allow is allowing people to take advantage of that enrollment. And there's very minimal regulatory guidance. We have the burden of proof to stop somebody from enrolling. So we've had to build out a lot of systems to stop that. We're finding now criminals are manipulating that online enrollment. One, yes, they're trying to get service with no intention of paying at an easy ID, but also they're now leveraging our system to validate stolen information that they've bought on the black web, on another market, and they can use our site to validate that information, that the consumer information that they've acquired and bought works. And then they can go leverage that for other nefarious purposes. And I use the word perpetrator because as we talk, I mean, this is somebody that is doing it on purpose with criminal intent. And so as we look at the next slide as well, the impact of this, of what we're seeing is that it went from just being people posting in a green sheets, get cheap electricity. They would sign up an easy ID with stolen information and never pay to now, these are organized individuals, organized criminal rings that are both onshore and offshore. They're leveraging all of this data. They're leveraging automated solutions with dialers and coming across multiple platforms. And this is having a major financial impact on all reps. If you start to look at, what was the cost that you paid to acquire your customer? If you look at what is 1 to 2 billing cycles of that fraudulent enrollment sitting with you, utilizing the electricity, the risk in your resources of the power that you've went out and procured and bought to provide for that easy ID. Then now you're tracking it on your AR and bad debt and having to manage that and build out solutions. This quickly becomes north of $1,000 for one fraudulent enrollment. And as these happen quicker and quicker every day, this financial risk is building up and is something that we have to work together to fight against. Beyond that, it's not just that one enrollment at $1,000 one time online. We're seeing this is coming across our own enrollment paths through our website. We're seeing them leverage our partner broker sites, whether it be a national partner or somebody regionally. They are then also exploiting any gaps they can find in our call center. So on any day, I can get a report that'll show me one easy ID that attempted to come through our own enrollment path, that has attempted to come through 2 or 3 broker paths, and also called into our call center. So the organization and individuals are being very sophisticated, testing each of the enrollment paths, looking for gaps and vulnerabilities. And as soon as they find one, they're jumping on it. And we will see enrollments go from 10 to 50 to sometimes 100 within a couple hours through any of these paths where they're just hitting our system hard. And that's one way. For those of us that have face to face teams, you know that we're working with teams and agents out there who aren't always doing what's best for the customers. And we're having to manage that face to face enrollment. They may be leveraging some sort of pressure tactics, or they have stolen data themselves. And so you have to be very vigilant to look at in doing QA and sales across all of your sales channels and understanding, what are those key indicators to look for across them. And so as we look at, what are ways that we have been looking to identify fraud on the next slide, as we've seen this happen over a long period of time, years, it was very easy at first to say, okay, look at IP addresses. Well, systems have become more advanced. They can route IPs, they can block IPs. That's one thing you can look for. And even just looking at, not just all four octets, but maybe being more sophisticated, looking at the first three and starting to look for patterns in the way IP addresses change. We also look at email and phone numbers flagging across all of our enrollments of any channel, both completed or those that we're sending in pending or just an open status. So, all the data that you collect, whether that enrollment completed or not, you can start to build into systems for more robust machine learning and understanding what fraudulent customers could be looking like and what to look for in the future. And that tech stack of, what is it that you have in place? So we look at everything from what data can we collect from a individual system? What is it about their phone device or their computer device that we can start to track and capture? How quickly are they? How quickly are the keystrokes being logged? How fast are they moving between the pages and making selections? And using that information in combination with the customer information that they're providing, and some of the vendors that are part of the coalition, and then some of the vendors that you're using today have more advanced software to start to tie that data together and look at the past historical customer data to say, where you can build a process and algorithm that says this is most likely fraud and start to block those and slow that path down. And then when you see it transition from a digital enrollment into the call center, so that's where on the next slide, we've really built out processes for our call centers to start to look for auditory cues. There are simple questions that we all ask in our enrollment process around the individual's name, date of birth, social, and address. And immediately the agents can look for hesitation, pauses, things that trigger flags that this customer is probably suspicious. And then you can go immediately into your fraud mitigation steps. And that can be a variety of things that you could be looking to verify. You can leverage date of birth and social security number built out with systems that can validate that. And then you can go steps further with technology that allows you to receive a customer's selfie holding an ID, which the software then can do a match, a facial recognition match, as well as a match on the ID being held, and look for clues. Has that picture been doctored or been, worked with in an AI platform to provide more false data information to help perpetrate the fraud? Uh, Implementing TPV across any of your enrollment processes where you can capture both the customer's authorization for your own protection, but also being able to capture GPS location of a device. Where are they? Where are they in location to an IP address? Where are they in location to that Easy ID being enrolled? And receiving that allows you to, again, take further steps to validate, is that person who they say they are? And is this an enrollment that you want to come through? Even with all those steps in place, um, robust tech stack, really great trained agents, uh, the enrollments are still coming through that are fraud. And you can't just stop there and no longer look. So building out what is the KPIs and data that you can start to look at for those customers that have enrolled. Even after they've enrolled, building out triggers that say, hey, we need to go back and look at this enrollment. It came through, go back, request IDs, request for other proof that that residence is where they at, so that you're providing service to a valid customer at a valid address that you should be. Monitoring bad debt is one of the easiest ways to look at immediate signs of possible fraud. As you look at those accounts that start to go over 30 days immediately missing a payment, tracking that as possible fraud, looking for those regular markers. You can also start to see chargebacks immediately. If you see chargebacks on deposits, chargebacks on payments, declined ACHs, all of those are triggers that we find, help identify possible fraud, even once a customer has started flowing, and allows you to begin to um, hopefully fight that as theft of service. And that's important also, getting those customers off your books as quickly as you can. And then what do you do with those customers? For us, we at BKV Energy, we're taking a very hard stance. We are not going to make it easy for somebody to perpetrate fraud with us. We hope that it begins to put the pain point at the local level and then work up larger. So, immediately we work with our internal legal team to be able to send out letters to that address that's receiving service, letting them know, we're not going to stand for this. That, if there's somebody that you are working with that has helped procure the electricity on your behalf, that, we would love to work with you and understand it. And if not, we're going to continue to pursue that. There is a special agent in Houston. I think we'll share some of that information afterwards with the FBI, who is also, with us in this fight. And we began to work with him to understand, what data do they need to be able to do their cyber research? What can we provide to them around the possible customer accounts that are perpetrating this fraud, so that they can actively pursue and understand what systems are being used, what's being done onshore, and also what's happening offshore, and how large of a scale this is. And when they came to us, they said, well, this needs to be at least a minimum of $1 million. And while BKV Energy, we've only launched 18 months ago, it was very easy to add up numbers and talk to a couple other reps and say, yeah, we can hit your $1 million threshold and go way beyond that quickly. And so there was scale there to get them engaged to help us pursue that. And so then that takes me to, how do we continue moving this forward? And that's that collaboration and support. So there's been a number of reps that, I've already been able to talk to. It's great that Brandon's on this call because, it's another rep that says this is something that we have to work together on, share best practices where we can, understand what's working and what's not working. Maybe there's a vendor that's already onto something that we can help build out and provide, a more robust network. Working with regulatory, your leg reg teams. I've had the pleasure of working with Miguel in the past. Understanding what regulatory and legal and regulatory requirements there are, what we can and can't do around consumer protection laws. And then that provides us really a best in class solution for our industry. And then that has really an impact to prevent and stop fraud from happening in the future. Um, and so it's definitely been, something that continues for us to learn and grow from. There's, everybody on this call would agree. It's amazing how quickly um, fraudsters improve their technical resources, and if they would really apply that effort towards something that was productive and good for us, it would be great. And so us joining together and providing our experiences in the minds on this call really hopefully will allow us to have a positive impact going forward.
Well, thank you, Sam, very much. And before we go to the next speaker, I did get a couple questions. So, first, I just want to remind anybody who came on perhaps a little bit late that yes, you will be able to review the presentation afterwards. Once it's been recorded, we will post it on our website and provide a link to that so you can review it. Sam, one of the questions I got is, do you have any sense of the average percentage of fraud that might be occurring in Texas for the reps? I know that's a very tough question because you're just one company, but
Yeah.
thought I'd
Yep.
ask.
Yeah. So I mean, I'll give a range of numbers. At worst, on a given day, I have seen up to 75% of the enrollments coming through a digital platform be flagged as fraud. Uh, and that's not just like questionable fraud. That is, I'm not even going to take the enrollment um, due to like easy tech stack solutions of customers failing simple identification tests, OTP, and a couple other things that we have in place. So yeah, at worst case, I've seen 75% of enrollments in a day be fraud.
Okay. Well, and I've received a couple other questions, but I think I'm going to kind of hold off on those because I think we might get a nice dialogue between you, Brandon, Miguel, and probably Kelly. So we'll move on to our next topic, which is identified as POTS, pans, and regulatory lag. I was in a prior life in the telecom industry, so when I saw this, I chuckled to myself, but now I'm going to turn it over to Miguel. He is going to explain what this is about and discuss a lot of the regulatory information that he's seen working this issue as it relates to fraud. So with that, Miguel, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madeline. Before we get into the slide deck, and thank you, Tony, for having this one up, I wanted to explain the title. And I was practicing before the commission back in when Pura 95 came around, which opened up the door to competition in the telecom market. And the commission and the rest of us that practiced before the commission had to come up with regulations to address that. So we feverishly worked on that. And right as we thought we had everything going and had a good, robust, comprehensive set of regulations, the whiz bang engineers came up with new stuff. And while our regulations were good for plain old telephone service, we had to play catch up again, this time for the pretty amazing new stuff, as it's called in the telecom market. So every time we moved forward on that, they'd come up with something else. Data hitting a mobile device, for example, which was unheard of at the bit, in 95, but it became a reality. And then we all get texts on our cell phones now. Uh, and the ability of the commission or other regulatory bodies to keep up with this innovation is the term where the term regulatory lag comes from. We're facing something very similar in this, in that, as Sam pointed out, the fraudsters are evolving and they're evolving rather quickly. So right as we put an end or come up with a process to stop one type of fraud, there's another scam or another fraud. And to quote the great American philosopher Yogi Berra, it's deja vu all over again, in that we're constantly playing catch up and not ahead of this. So there are two types of fraud in the retail market. Both of them are important. The one that we're talking about now is the second type, the fraud perpetuated against retail electric providers by individuals that exploit market processes, rules in the market. They know what they're doing, and they're looking to gain service without paying. But there is that other kind of fraud. There's people out there that are preying on vulnerable communities, the elderly, the recently immigrated, the folks that don't speak English, and claiming to be electric providers or utilities, and basically doing them a disservice. They're committing crimes against them as well. The reason this is important is because it sets up a conflict between how do the regulators protect the vulnerables, what I'm calling the vulnerables, and at the same time address our issue, the issue we're talking about today, which is the ne'er-do-wells that are trying to steal power. Next slide, please, Tony. And it's the first type of fraud that often gets a lot of attention. The victims in those fraud cases are sympathetic. They are more vulnerable, and they do need to be protected. There's entire divisions. The customer protection division exists at the commission. There's not a rep protection commission. It's the division for a reason, and we understand that. In addition, there's OPUC takes care of small businesses and residential customers. Again, there's a reason for that. They're more vulnerable. Um, the second type of fraud happens against reps, my clients, y'all, and they're not as sympathetic. Why? Because reps have a way to fight back against fraud. Sam pointed out a number of things that his company's doing. Brandon Young is going to come on, and he's got some illustrations of what they're doing. It's very obvious that reps are taking a very active approach toward handling this. We, in addition, when there are violations, we're seen as the ones more likely to violate the rules than an innocent customer. So we've got that going against us. And generally in the utility world, we establish the safeguards to protect vulnerable customers rather than business entities. And I would point out that sometimes is shoes on the other foot. Large commercial customers can opt out of subchapter R, which we affectionately known as the customer protection rules. There's only a handful of rules that they cannot opt out of. That's because we expect bigger commercial customers, larger commercial customers, to be able to protect themselves. They're at the same level, if not larger, than some of the reps serving them. And of course, the largest customers, the big industrials that buy at megawatt and more, they don't even need to go with an option 1 rep. They can go with an option 2 rep. The option 2 reps don't need to establish their technical, managerial, financial requirements. They basically are on their own because they're dealing with big, sophisticated clients who have the power to take care of themselves. So again, the first type of fraud, we have more vulnerable communities. In this type of fraud, we are the victims, and we're seen as being able to take care of ourselves. So next slide, please. So a couple things we have to do is, as Mr. Luna pointed out, as Mr. Young will point out, we have to take actions to protect ourselves. And Kelly will talk to some of this in the future in her slides. But one of the things that I'd like to frame our discussions about is that fraud, while I say it's new scams, but it's an old crime. Ultimately it is identity theft. And we need for people to realize that identity theft is the key to these scams, these frauds going on that are being undertaken against fraud markets. Against the reps in the market. Having law enforcement understand that, and as Mr. Luna pointed out, there's now FBI involvement. Having the regulatory bodies understand this and the legislators understand this, I think will help get law enforcement, regulatory, and legislative responses. I do know it, and at the end of the slide deck, future presentations by this body, the Rep Fraud Coalition, are mentioned, and one of them is rules that need to be changed, statutes that need to be changed. So I'm not going to go into a lot of those, but for example, there are some things that could be done. And don't think that the commission is an unwieldy, unchanging, monolithic creature. It is not. I will point to y'all for the Texas Excel management case, the recent First Key Homes case, the investigation of there's a one kicked off last week against Berkshire Properties. These are investigations of property owners dealing with multi-tenant family homes and the frustration of customer choice. These are not the typical traditional market participants, But the commission is flexing its wings. It's moving beyond what we normally see as traditional market participants and finding the bad actors. So we can hope that they are moving beyond reps and traditional market participants and looking for those bad actors and seeing what they can do uh, to take action against them. However, the commission is a creature created by legislature. It only has the authority and the powers that have been granted to it by the legislature, which means in some instances uh, we may need additional uh, authority for the commission. You guys may have heard that there's an election coming up in November. The reason this is important is the state legislature here in Texas accepts pre-filing for the upcoming session the Monday after the general election. So general election is in November, just 3 months away. Following that, the next week, the Texas legislative process begins. And in case you want the back date, it's March 14th, 60th day into the legislature. So if you're thinking of doing something at the legislative session this go around, action's got to be taken now, because by March 14th, the door is closed on new bills. And actually, that's probably too late for a bill to get through the process, which means you have to wait until 2027. The legislature only meets every 2 years, and they only meet for 6 months. So it's a sprint every so often. Um, One of the things that can be done is talking about theft of service, that fraudulent enrollment is theft of service, and there should be some specialized disconnection rules. That's one idea. We'd have to look into that. Specialized disconnection rules for critical care customers, for example, prove that the commission can carve out a certain segment and treat those disconnects a little differently. Another thing that could happen is bodies like this, or perhaps a governmental entity, either ERCOT or PUC or the IMM, become a repository so that reps can report the types of scams that they're seeing. Remember, lighthouses don't save ships by taking away the rocks. Lighthouses save ships by just warning ships that the rocks are there. So this list of fraud scams could be accessed by the reps, and they could understand what other people are seeing. They could collect data such as in which TDU areas these are happening, what's the prevalence, what's the rate of fraud compared to their normal enrollments, that kind of thing. So next slide, please. And I know I'm running out of time, but the reason this is so difficult and why we have to keep these conversations going is we as reps do have a desire to enroll customers, and Mr. Luna used the word frictionless. I like that. As frictionless as possible. We want to make it go smooth. We want it to go fast. We need those customers to get onto our system and leave a happy customer. But by the same token, we need the customer protection rules in there to protect against the vulnerables, and at the same time be able to jettison fraudulent accounts. So we want to do due diligence, and we want to go fast. Those conflict. We want to protect vulnerables, and we want to jettison fraudulent accounts. Those conflict, which means these conversations need to keep happening. So one of the things that each company needs to do is look at themselves and determine how they're going to handle these tensions. If you turn away customers, you turn away money. But if you get hit with a fraudulent enrollment, that's going to cost you money. You just book them differently. One is lost opportunity, one is bad debt that you're never going to recover. So we have to take a nuanced approach, looking at all of the different possibilities and all of the tensions to come up with a solution. And once we develop that solution, we need to be able to market it to law enforcement, the legislature, the commission, and see if we can get some support in combating these fraudulent actions and bad enrollments. So that's the end of my slide presentation.
Okay, thank you, Miguel. Real quickly, and we'll probably have more conversations on this, but is it fair to assume that you believe that the current rules, either for the customer, the victim, or for the reps, do the current rules adequately address the issue of fraud today?
Not really, not really. The problem is the rules simply don't take fraud into consideration. They were created and they have been written in a perfect world, and we don't live in that world anymore. That's the whole point of regulatory lag. The hope, however, is that the commission is changing its views on what it can do and how it can do it. So hopefully the next iteration of the customer protection rules will, just like there's specific subset of rules for critical care customers, maybe a subset of rules for fraudulent enrollments.
Right. And that's one of the reasons we're having this as hope as a beginning point to educate people and to bring some kind of coalition together to say we do need to, get some thoughts together and make some recommended changes. We'll talk more about that, but thank you very much, Miguel. This was very helpful. And now we're going to turn to another rep that has experienced some things on fraud as well. Brandon Young, CEO of Young Energy, is now going to speak to us about implementing safeguards.
Afternoon, everyone. Yeah, so we historically served a base of customers that were predominantly prepaid, and so we were a latecomer to the fraud game because of the stringentness that requiring a prepayment brings to the case and how we were managing credit cards. And so when we entered the space and started competing for postpaid customers, we quickly learned what everybody else had been learning, which is, the links that the fraudsters will go to. And so what we've done online and also internally, we're working on additional policies, is we've wanted to make sure that we're not discriminating or turning away people exclusively based on having emails or phone numbers. But we've found that using a phone number and subsequently an email in concert with one-time verification codes for both, not one or the other, but both, has significantly cut down on the number of accounts being created in fraud. And that's part A of the equation. The second part of the equation is that you're still going to have a few trickle through. And so the catch is that you have to catch them upon re-entry or reattempt to create duplicate accounts. And so we're actively working on better ways to identify that proactively, as well as flag those accounts within our systems so that our systems will automatically block these repeat offenders. And so that's what we found to be our best combat thus far. Next slide, please. So again, we require a cell phone number. We're using a third-party service to ensure that we're not accepting voice over IP, temporary phone numbers, or other things that can receive text messages. It has to be a mobile number if you want to enroll online. Likewise, we're doing the same thing for email addresses. We're also, refusing certain things. And so many of these third-party services like Twilio Flex and otherwise offer ways to tailor the rules to how you see fit, so that it goes back to that concept of friction, whether or not one wants to create a significant amount of friction or not. And, at some level, we all have to contend with what is a livable amount of fraud that we're going to contend with until we can figure out how to, over time, eliminate or reduce it down to the minimal amount. If the customer then insists that they're not a fraudster and that, for whatever reason, their phone number or email they couldn't validate, we'll work with them on the phone. We have additional other proprietary processes that we're creating to further validate them. And then again, when that person tries to come back, we use a combination of phone numbers, emails, and social security numbers to block them from getting us once. So, it's kind of, get us once, fool on me, get us twice. Get us once, fool on you, shame on you, get us twice, shame on me, right? And so next slide, please. Kind of went over this. One of the other things that we've tried to do is when using third-party verification, We try to ensure that the phone number the customer is calling from also is recognized on the account. That can be a point of friction that can cause challenges. So we do attempt to use that, but we don't always require it for obvious reasons. Maybe somebody calls from work, or maybe from a friend's phone or something like that. Next slide. The other side of the equation is broker fraud. And so recently we've been contacted by a number of, quote, brokers that are, they're registered with the Public Utility Commission, and they claim to have, either they're holding an aggregator's license, or they claim to have authority to switch over blocks of customers. And obviously that raises a red flag for us. And so we do everything that we can by, forbidding switching. If they're caught, we terminate for cause. They lose future commissions. One of the other things I did not mention on here, but typically if you get a group like that and you offer them residual only commission, that's also a good way to combat that, because these guys are looking for that up front so they can keep moving customers between REPs. And then we do as much as we can to vet them through various different processes. We're tightening that up as well. And just like, we're running credit checks for customers and things like that, we also are looking to do similar types of checks for new partners and brokers. Next slide. That's really it. I kind of went through that quickly, so I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Brandon. I have a question for you. You mentioned wanted to know, do you see a drop in your enrollments when you are requesting consumers to receive and verify codes?
Yeah, we were very concerned about that. And of course, I mean, if one were to run tests, right, with those settings in place versus not, then of course there is a fallout. What we typically see though is most times the customers that fall out, they'll actually return. And so we'll see 2 entries in our systems where maybe they didn't have their phone with them, or access to their email. So they came back and they started the process again, and we record that and we can see that. But I mean, yes, if as an REP, we introduce friction, it is going to reduce the sales numbers. But for every one person that gets through and creates fraud for $200 or $300 in losses, I mean, you're taking the entire life cycle profit from another. So got to do something.
Right. So in your view, it's probably worth it.
Correct. And of course they can call in, and we have some different processes internally via the call center where we attempt to manage that for the consumers. And oftentimes, I mean, we do get people calling and stating that, they don't have this or they don't have access to that. But generally speaking, in this day and age, the majority of people have mobile numbers and also email addresses, we're finding.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I do have some other questions, but I think I'll move on to Kelly first, and then kind of ask some of these questions of the group as a whole. So now I'll turn it over to Kelly, who's going to talk about our last topic of combating fraud. Kelly? Sorry, we can't hear you right now. Mm. Well, maybe what I'll do in the interim is ask some of my general questions while Kelly tries to get her phone working. It's always hard on these kind of things. But I'm just going to kind of open it up to the presenters. I guess my first question is, Sam had mentioned in his that, one of the places to go is to, if you're having issues with fraud from a rep perspective, who do you, think you can report it to? One body he's been working with is the FBI. And one thing, Sam, you had said was, they ask certain kinds of information of you. I guess, first of all, what type of information, when you reported it to them, what kind of information are they requesting?
Sure. Great question. So for them to be able to do their forensic research, um, coming to an agreement on what access to our data and systems that we were open to sharing with them, because that meant, there's a lot of the information that we gathered during an enrollment around the perpetrator's system, their IP address, the address, what encrypted social date of birth information we can provide from our tech platform. That the more information we can provide to the FBI, the fuller picture they can get at consolidating the data and completing successful research on their end.
Okay. Miguel or Brandon, any other bodies you can report to or that you have in the past? I mean, for example, have you gone to the commission, and if so, what was the response? Or have you gone to, work with some consumer groups? Or is the FTC a place to go?
I personally haven't had much success in those realms yet, and I was looking to gain some insight there. And Sam, was the first person that answered that they actually had at least an FBI field office that was interested in looking into this.
Right.
I've spoken to local DAs in a couple of different counties, but I think what's happening is they're looking at this from a county by county perspective, whereas Sam's solution, the FBI is doing it in the aggregate, which I think is the answer. A one-time fraud in Travis County, for example, isn't going to amount to much, and the DA is not going to be interested. But if the FBI is looking at it across the entire market, then it is much more important.
Okay, great. And I put Sam on the spot, so I was gonna also do the same. Brandon or even Miguel or anybody else have a sense of the percentage of fraud occurring in Texas for reps?
I mean, when we were wide open, I mean, it was, like 80% of the people that were finding us at the time. It was very
Wow.
bad. So, again, we weren't necessarily validating phone or email, and we came from the avenue that I think the buffer that was protecting us, ironically, was the fact that we were selling prepaid service and customers were having to, pass address and other credit card validation steps. And so that was, I think, stemming it off. And so it was immense. And so, we started chipping away at that. And as of right now, I mean, we're under 5%.
There,
Oh, that's amazing, because I was shocked when Sam said that number, but that goes to the, absolutely how critical it is to get on top of this. I mean, that can wipe a business out very quickly.
there would have been a time that I would have been shocked by that as well, but I have the benefit of having conversations with several different of my clients, many reps. So unlike Brandon and Sam, who are looking at one rep, I've heard from multiple reps that it's over 50%. So when I heard those numbers, it's consistent with what I've been hearing from my client base. And they have been working at it, like Brandon, to get it down into single digits, but at some point they've all hit over 50%, it seems like.
Yeah, and there's another hidden cost that goes with it, which is, even if you're able to stop it to some degree, depending on what step you're running, validations and credit checks. I mean, these credit checks can also be very impactful to our bottom lines.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, lovely.
Well, Kelly, this will be a good time for you to jump in, and we can come back to some more questions, but definitely want to get you in. So we'll turn it over to Kelly now.
And it should be pretty quick because it's really supporting a lot of what the guys have already said on the call. And I basically, we all play a role in this. It's not just reps. It's not just the commission. It's consumers. Everybody plays a role in this. And so it takes a village. But there's some things that we need to do as reps before we whine or complain to all these others for help and support. And yes, there are the technological solutions and safeguards that Brandon and Sam has spoken about, but there are also just some pretty common sense, easy to implement internal controls. And I think it starts with understanding the characteristics of fraud. So I guess like meetings like this and webinars where you get to hear about other experiences, but pay attention to fraud trends in other markets and other lines of business. Um, that we're not alone, we're not unique. This is something fraud affects all industries. So just stay aware. Do a fraud risk assessment of your current processes if you haven't already done that. For example, analyzing your financial data can reveal anomalies that may indicate that you have some fraudulent activities. Implement internal controls. So, for example, segregation of duties. No single person should have control of all parts of a transaction. Auditing, audit trails, utilize passwords for access controls and PINs. Some basic things that really should be part of your normal operating practices. Create a hotline for your employees to escalate suspected fraud. So this could be when somebody's on the phone. What is the process for escalating suspected fraud at the point of sale? Because it could also relate to shady practices of other employees. So that's something to be aware of. Really, audit your agents, but also listen to your agents. Train your agents and your vendor partners to detect fraudulent activity. So things that everyone has already mentioned, multiple enrollments from the same IP, but then there's some nuanced things, sort of like odd characteristics, like applicants requesting Spanish as their chosen language for a name that would not otherwise suggest a Spanish-speaking preference. So just some things to keep in mind as you're developing your processes. And then what other quality controls do you have in place? So frequent and regular call monitoring, routine audits of your current processes and materials, and then proper vetting. And so I know Sam mentioned vetting. This is not, and maybe Brandon mentioned it, but this is not just sign an agreement over email and one and done. Visit the physical locations and do some secret shopping. I know Madeline has a funny story about that. If there's time at the end, I think you discovered that what was on paper and pictures wasn't exactly what it was like in real life at a particular vendor. And then I know Miguel touched on the two different types of fraud. Integrate customer education into your fraud prevention strategy. It's just a best practice. And I identified a few things on the slides to help keep your customers aware of. And so it's never a bad idea, but we all have to work together. And so we make the effort, and the people who we're looking to for potential rule changes, they will take note. And it's good to have educated customers because it just makes a clear market. So I think that's pretty much all I had for now.
Okay, thank you very much, Kelly. Something that caught my attention when Brandon was talking, and I thought maybe some of the panelists could talk about it. Maybe Brandon, you could expand a bit. But you mentioned brokers, and that there were a couple of instances where it seemed like, I don't know if it was you were working with brokers that either weren't, I don't know, licensed, or they weren't doing what they were supposed to be, or had fraudulent practices, but wondered if you could talk a bit about that. And, Sam, if you have any experience, or others that might have some comments.
I mean, of course, working with brokers in general, I mean, one has to be, we as REPs are in control, not the other way around. So what we allow is what we get. We have to create processes to monitor, verify, and validate. Like Kelly said, using secret shopping or other techniques. If it's telephonic enrollments, they have to provide call recordings. I mean, there's all sorts of rules, but it's not hard to become a broker. It's a one-page document, a $25 fee, and you're a broker, right? And so it's not going to put much in way of anyone getting in trouble. And so just be cautious, because there are some very bad ones out there.
I would also point out that the penalty to brokers is they can disappear, quite frankly, and come back under a different name. And because it's not a certification process, it's simply a registration process, they can leave and come back. Whereas if a retail electric provider has a number of complaints, that's a bad mark against the retail electric provider, even if caused by the broker. And the rep personnel, should something go badly, if they try to come back, the commission will remember who they are. So it's not like you've got the same kind of anonymity as a broker, as a retail electric provider. And Brandon's absolutely right. The reps are control and are in control, and the reps are supposed to be in control. So if something goes badly, they're responsible, and that's in the rules.
All right. Well, it's kind of to that point. Could any of you talk to a few points about just vetting some of the brokers? I mean, how do you go about doing that?
Application form, if it's an individual, credit checks, if it's a business, seeing if they have a credit profile, asking where they're based out of, ask to meet face to face.
Well,
Want to commit fraud, doesn't want to look you in the eye usually.
I think that's key.
One client sent me a proposed broker agreement, and I went to the Secretary of State's website, and that entity did not exist as a registered entity in Texas. Huge red flag.
yeah. So some simple checks that you could have been aware that you probably had a problem on your hand to begin with. Well, I think we're getting close to being out of time, so I think I'll just very briefly talk a little bit. We've had a lot of people ask, how do we participate in the coalition? And so I do want to thank everybody that's participated. It's important. I think it's by sharing this information, we do help each other, and that is how we establish best practices. It is how we will come up with recommendations to the legislature and or the commission. It's first gathering. So there's a number of ways you can participate. To be on the group. I mean, examples are we've had people help identifying, gathering, doing some research. Another way is just today, like Sam or Brandon or Miguel or Kelly helping as subject matter experts, as being a panelist. Or maybe you don't want to do that, you don't have that much time, but you can be somebody who helps us get the word out or gather information or identify potential speakers. So there's a lot of different ways to participate. If you're interested in participating, I mean, even just being a team advocate and sharing that we're doing this. And I do want to say it's not Texas only. We did a Texas only because there's some unique things about the Texas market that you don't see in other places, but definitely fraud is everywhere. This is not a Texas only issue. It's just, the suppliers are responsible for doing the billing. You don't have the POR, purchase of receivable, that you do elsewhere. But please, reach out to us if you want to participate, and, happy to discuss how we do that. And there is a link for more information on how to participate, and just, email myself or one of the team members, and we'll be happy to talk to you about that. And I certainly, we're finishing up, but before there's any other last minute comments or whatever, I definitely want to thank the speakers. You did a great job. I appreciate, it's a lot of time and work to put something like this together, and we appreciate you coming forward. I was a little skeptical that we would get any reps to talk about it, so I'm very appreciative, and I've gotten tremendous feedback from folks saying that they are very interested. Even during the summer, we had over 100 registrants. And this is, the height of vacation season, summertime. So definitely a lot of interest. Stay tuned. We are going to be asking for your feedback, any questions, if there's additional topics. We probably will do one on the other states where they're dealing with, purchase of receivables and some other issues that aren't, that are a little bit unique and don't impact Texas. But, Texas is not going away. There's a lot of work to be done in Texas, so we will follow up on that. So I just really want to thank all of the panelists and all of the participants for being on the webinar. So thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Bye.